One of the major highlights of this meeting is always the G.Paul Moore lecture. The original G.Paul Moore lecture was delivered by G.Paul Moore in 1981. Dr. Moore was one of the giants in speech-language pathology and one of the early interdisciplinary collaborators. He and Hans von Leyden had an interdisciplinary clinic in Chicago at Northwestern years before most people thought about that collaboration. Paul spent much of his career in Gainesville, where he trained, mentored, and quietly and gently guided generations of speech-language pathologists into thoughtful, collaborative, interdisciplinary, and dedicated care. This lecture each year is given by invitation of the Board of Directors of the Voice Foundation. We invite senior people in the voice world from all disciplines. If you look at the list, you'll notice that they more or less go physician, speech-language pathologist, pedagogue, scientist, and cycle. And the people whom we invite are people who have years of experience, judgment, perspective, and whose reflections we would like to hear. They are invited to speak about whatever they want to speak about, and there has been extraordinary variety in those choices, but they have always been stirring. This year's speaker has been a fixture at the Voice Foundation since 1984. He's rarely missed. That was 2 years after he got his master's degree and 5 years before he got his PhD at the Royal Institute of Technology, ATH, in Stockholm, in electrical engineering. Sten Ternström has brought not only wonderful research in choral acoustics and in voice synthesis and simulation and analysis and many other things, but he has brought an inspirational attention to thoughtful, rigorous detail and cautious evaluation, integration, and creation of technology to enhance voice analysis and voice care. We are most interested to hear what he thinks is important. Dr. Sten Ternström.
Dear friends, dear colleagues, and dear Voice Foundation, thank you all for being what you are and for inviting me to do this. I will talk about minding the gap. Is this one? Here we go. So, this place in the body is just a few inches below the vocal folds. It is the carina, where the trachea branches out to the lungs, left and right. Push your fibroscope past the vocal folds, and this is the next stop. In over 30 years of voice symposia, I had never before seen this image. I mean, shame on me. How narrow-minded can you get? And this is a sort of symbolic place, isn't it? Going to need a better clicker. Yeah, here we are. It's a sort of place of decision, isn't it? Left or right? Your place or mine? Does it matter? Does anything matter if we take a larger perspective? Let's see if I can. Yes. This is a star shot. And it's right in our cosmic neighborhood. It's only 2,000 light years away from the Earth, and yet it is a very, very mysterious and alien place, isn't it? It could even be a painting. The most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. It's the source of all true art and science. And that's a quote from Albert Einstein. I've been playing around with a few quotes, as you all know, in the course of this presentation. This is where it gets a bit pretentious. That's the logo of my university. And one of the things I really like about my university is its motto. I always distrusted the notion of there being a great divide between art and science. Vetenskap och konst. That's Swedish. It's close to the German, Wissenschaft und Kunst, and not so close to Roman science and art. So the license, this divide is something that seems to be a deeply rooted cliché in our society, and with the license of this occasion, I thought I'd try to look at how this, how an art versus science perspective would work as applied to our field of voice. The Swedish word konst today means art, as in fine arts, but when this motto was coined in the 1800s, it actually meant craft, or if you will, engineering. In fact, the word art, even in English, up to the 17th century or so, meant any skill or mastery. It was much the same as craft or science. And the greatest polymath of all, Leonardo da Vinci, clearly saw the little distinction between those. He said, art is the queen of all sciences, communicating knowledge to all the generations of the world. If we go further back to ancient Greece, where else? Basic education there rested on three pillars, or the trivium: grammar, rhetoric, and logic, while advanced studies stood on four: arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. We read that this trivium quadrivium structure pervaded academia right up to the 18th century. I will need a little mouse here, I think. Do we have, can I get that? Or the touchpad? Okay, right, thank you. Today, perhaps astronomy is the most sciencey of these. It's sort of a pure science in a way. Let's see, where is the... Okay, I'm having a problem with the clicker, I'm afraid. No?
Can you just hit spacebar? Hit the spacebar, it'll advance.
Okay, what we see here is the Andromeda galaxy. It's one of the most iconic. It's our nearest neighbor. It's 220,000 light years across and 2.5 million light years away. It's heading our way, and it will collide with our own somewhat smaller galaxy, the Milky Way, 4.5 billion years from now. Right, so the message here is actually the stars don't care. We are very insignificant. I think Einstein said something to that effect as well. Science and art are profoundly human ways of seeing the world. Here's another quote. Art is I, science is we. Now what on earth might that mean? Okay, here's a world. And if we look on that world with the eye of science, we know that science strives to be objective. And I suppose that means that it arrives at things that everybody who are of reasonable mind can agree on it, regardless of who you are. It's kind of impersonal. And it describes, it explains. So maybe maybe my first impulse as a scientist here could be to put labels on what I see. Can you read those? So we have the a bird's eye view of the southern Scandinavia here, Stockholm, Oslo, Copenhagen. Might even point them out. And above them all, the Aurora Borealis. I thank NASA for this image. We might also have the impulse to start measuring things like distances. If I measure the distance from Stockholm to Oslo, I can predict the time it would take me to get there. I can't imagine why I should want to. The artist, on the other hand, strives to be subjective, and that's very important. The artist strives to be personal, giving a non-neutral view of things, to express something, and possibly to interpret something in new terms. So, if I were a poet, I might be inclined to look at this view and say something like, fair Gaia turned, her eyebrow now askew, that on her back the itch of cities grew. So, it's sort of about seeing the world in different ways, as I see it. On one hand, we have observations made for science, trying to build an objective view that will explain something. On the other hand, we have the artist who observes, and it's supposed to be subjective and to interpret. And in between, we have some kind of gap. So today we're not, for once, talking about the glottal gap, we're talking about another gap. But and seeing the world, in one sense, astronomy is a very pure science because you can almost only observe. That's the only thing you can do. You can't really make experiments with the cosmos, right? But if you want to do something about the world, you need something more, and you need some kind of craft. It's through the crafts that we actually make things happen. The craft is concerned with the concrete, the particular, and with implementing things so that we can aspire to change the world that we live in. Science, of course, is intimately involved with that. Science informs the craft. The craft, of course, is synonymous for technology, or for technique, or for engineering, if you will. And it's by these means that we can change our world. And so you see a kind of a loop there going round and round, which I would call just our ordinary R&D loop, research and development. But so you could argue that art has an equivalent role, not perhaps to inform technology or craft, but to incite it. An artist has a vision and wants to implement something, and he will need some sort of technique or technology to do that. It's interesting that the budgets that are allocated to this loop are about 100 times bigger than the budget allocated to that loop, at least in Sweden. Although the Swedish Research Council has now actually a program for what's called artistic research. It's still a very early days, and very few people are up to defining what artistic research actually is, but at least it's being recognized. But there's something missing from this picture, and that, of course, is math. And where does that fit in? Well, I think math, as opposed to craft, which is concrete in particular, math is occupied with the abstract and the general, and with formalizing things. And so it kind of feeds into all the others. You couldn't have science without math, you couldn't have crafts or engineering without math, you couldn't really have, I mean, math has a profound influence even on art. So perhaps this is an interesting diagram. And of course it's very, very satisfying. It's symmetrical. As an engineer, I'm very pleased with myself. And symmetry is not that common in nature. I mean, if you see something that is symmetrical, it is a telltale sign that somebody has interfered somehow. You made a mirror image, or you tried to construct something, right? Okay. So the next quote really had me off my feet for a bit. It says, "The worst state of affairs is when science begins to concern itself with art." All clear, said that. What on earth does he mean? Well, clearly the gap is wide. And that's probably fine. Maybe he means that the artist is supposed to be subjective, the scientist is supposed to be objective, and if we start mixing those things up, we're in trouble. Possibly. Are science and art even relevant to one another? I saw my sort of view of the world crumbling when I saw that quote. I think they are. Much more clever people than I have, of course, thought about this. In the 70s, there was a cult book called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Perhaps some of you read it. It was not an easy read, but it was very interesting. And it was about a man delving into, an inquiry into values is the subtitle. He actually went mad doing it. It's about a man who recovers from a psychic breakdown as a result of trying to figure out things like science and art and quality. So can we reconcile these two views without going mad, which would be convenient? I think we can. Some of you will recognize these lines. They are from a musical. That's the famous painting of Sunday in the Park by Georges Seurat, a Frenchman who invented the pixel. And so there is a very strong connection between art and technology. If I ask you what drives computer graphics development these days, well, it's the games. Really it is. And the games are stories. They surely belong to the arts. People make a lot of money making games, but that's sort of another matter. Okay? And so, back in 1984, some of you still remember Tom Shipp. He took me on as a guest researcher then, and he and Marilyn Shipp took me to my first Voice Foundation meeting. They also introduced me to the work of Stephen Sondheim and took me to see the show, Sunday in the Park with George. Georges Seurat was the painter who invented Pixel, and that show was so full of interplay between science and art and crafts, and it stuck in my mind for a good decade. Made a big impression on that. And what he says is, in one of the songs, having just the vision's no solution, everything depends on execution, putting it together, that's what counts. So, I think we can say that not getting this to click. Get up with the laser. Oh, there it is. Okay, thank you. So I think that we can say the relevance of science to art really lies in craft and creativity. There's another nice quote about that. To be creative means to connect. It is to abolish the gap between the body, the mind, and the soul, between science and art, between fiction and non-fiction. Interesting? Look at this. What's that? Is it an image from the internal of a fusion reactor? Actually, it's art inspired by science. I happen to know the artist is very interested in particle physics and cosmology. To be honest, she couldn't tell one equation from another. It's the mysteriousness of these disciplines that touches her. Now, what of the voice in all of this? I've been going on for a long time and I haven't even said anything about the voice. If we're going to set about bridging art and science in the field of voice, there are a number of challenges as I see it. I think the first one is, are we talking about the same thing? We have performing artists who give us thoughts, feelings, stories, and we have scientists who give us facts, principles, theories. Here's a long quote, I'll read it for you. Science is empirical, all about physical senses that tell us about the world. But physical senses are not the only senses we have. Nobody has ever seen a thought. Nobody has ever seen a feeling. And yet thoughts and feelings are where we live our lives most immediately, and science cannot connect with that. Well, you know what? I disagree. I think this is cutting the slice of the loaf of bread the wrong way. Let's look at different levels of representation. And those of you who have seen me do this one before, please forgive me. But I think we should do that. What is it that happens when we speak? Well, we produce sound, right? So we get an acoustic waveform that comes out of the mouth. How did that arise? Well, it arises because muscular forces move tissues. Those tissues push air. And the various physical actions that those are involved in, those muscular actions, are articulation, phonation, and respiration, as we've heard many times. All right, so what causes articulation, phonation, and respiration? Well, we have a motor pattern ingrained. We've learned to speak. So we have phonemes. They have timing, they have pitch, they have loudness, they have timbre. And the curious thing is that the mapping is not one-to-one. Loudness will map onto all of these, actually, or at least phonation and respiration and so on. There's a big cross-wiring going on here. And what determines the phonemes and that we want to produce? Well, there's a verbal stream of information. There's a prosodic stream, there's an expressive stream, and perhaps even an extra-linguistic stream when you put in a cough or something. All right, where does that information come from? Well, it comes from the content of the message that we want to transmit to the person listening, all right? And that content, in turn, is affected by the person's body, mood, personality, and situation. And those, in turn, are affected by society, language, and genre, to name a few things. So the fantastic thing is that in the acoustic waveform at the bottom, we can actually tell things about society, language, and genre of the person speaking, but the link is very, very deep. Okay? And if we, who studies this? Well, we have sound at the bottom, we have voice on the next level, we have speech, language, thought. And if we try to very roughly plot out that we have the natural sciences at the bottom, and then the humanities and social sciences, and at the top it's sort of the arts, in a way, in a sort of a relevance way of thinking about it. But I wouldn't say that we're going to slice this horizontally and say whatever's below is science and whatever above is arts. That would be very silly, because we have scientific disciplines at all these levels, right? The thing is, they go sort of from the objective to the subjective. The more we get to the higher levels there, the more we're dealing with things that are fundamentally human. And so that's sort of the human perspective. each level corresponds to a certain level of representation. And one of the things we need to be careful with when we talk between scientists and artists is to arrive at an agreement on what level of representation are we interested in. So if the actor says, I want to project this message to the audience, that can mean a number of things, really. I want the person to hear me, or I want the person to understand me, and you can think through that for yourself several times, okay. So what fascinates me as a scientist about the physical aspect of this is that there are traces of all of these in the acoustic waveform. We can pass a judgment on somebody's language or what they want to say or how they want to say it and so on. It's a fantastically rich encoding, and that's of course one of the reasons why voice is so interesting to study. Okay, challenge number 2 then is to choose the right questions. And perusing some of the articles about this, I found to my joy that somebody has already done this for us. Here's a quote: future singing voice research is encouraged to concentrate on establishing causal relationships between 1, physiological gestures and configurations of the sound generating system, 2, acoustic output, and 3, perceptual psychoacoustic assessment of sound quality. Well, that's brilliant. I'll sign to that. Thank you, Brian Gill and Christian Harris, LPD, a couple of years ago. That's fine. That will keep me busy until I retire, I'm sure, and probably you too. Okay. So I saved some time there. Third challenge, our research paradigm. What do I mean by that? Well, how do we do research? Well, we do it according to a very elaborate and detailed paradigm. We first make an informal observation of something. We ask a question: this looks funny, why is it this way? We have a hunch as to why it might be one way or another, so we state an hypothesis. And then we design a test to disprove that hypothesis. We observe it formally, and we analyze it, and we accept or reject the hypothesis. Okay? And then we publish, hopefully. We're supposed to publish even the negative results, remember that? Yeah. It's a bit boring. Yeah. So what's the problem here? Well, the test is often like this. Change one parameter, keeping everything else constant, and observe the dependent variable. Okay, here we go again. Please produce a sustained vowel at a comfortable pitch. Goodbye performance, goodbye audience. So I think really we have to start thinking about making experiments more ecological, and for the artists to perceive them as being relevant to what they're doing or what they're trying to do. And this is not easy. Some artists understand this piecemeal approach to things, but others don't have the patience, and I fully understand them. I would love a different research paradigm if I could come up with one. So here's an example of that. Does lung volume affect vocal fold deduction? And we had a paper about that earlier in the week, very nicely. Recently, we've been doing a little study about that here at KTH. There's a hypothesis that because of tracheal pull, higher lung volume should result well, we can measure the EGG, so we'll take the EGG, lower EGG contact quotient, and vice versa. There are lots of ifs and buts here. Tracheal pull would be very invasive to measure directly, although I suppose you could put 2 spots on the inside of the trachea and then see how much they move apart, if you could watch that. Not to be recommended. Larynx height would also affect the tracheal pull, not just the lung volume, and of course the singer can adjust the larynx height fairly independently of the lung volume. Subglottal pressure might affect the larynx height. The contact quotient can also vary with F0 and vocal effort. Okay. So, and of course trained singers, if there is an effect on phonation, they might actually compensate for any abductive force that occurs because of a change in lung volume. But let's try it. We can measure relative vocal fold contact using EGG.
As you can see there, we have a relative larynx height, also using EGG. We can measure changes in lung volume using respiratory, and we can measure the subglottal pressure, at least the intraoral pressure on pa-pa-pa. And, all right, for ecological validity, let's not do this on a sustained vowel. Let's sing a real song in various ways. So here's a little excerpt of what that might look like. You don't need to read the details. This is F0 up there, SPL, and down here we have the larynx height and the lung volume, and we recorded a few other things as well. Can you see which tune that is? Are you sleeping? Are you sleeping, Brother John? Brother John. Morning bells are ringing, morning bells. So it's a great tune that has built-in replication. Right. So we asked them to do that in mezzo forte and piano and forte, and at high lung volume and at low lung volume, with taking just small breaths for the phrases. Okay, and then we analyzed the EGG. We can get the prompter to do that for me. There we go. Actually, I'm only showing 4 of them here, but we have 20 EGG-shaped descriptors that allow us to cluster the EGG shapes into various categories. So we did this also on R's and P's and lyrics, and fortunately, at least with this subject, the outcome was fairly similar for those 3 types of tasks. And now we want to know, first, how much of this variation is due to variation in SPL and F0. So we map that across the... how do I switch to the other clicker? It's really somewhat trying. Okay, now it came. Are you doing that for me now?
Yeah, I clicked. You can click spacebar on the computer also.
Oh, spacebar, all right, thank you. Right, so what we have then is, go back, thank you. We have the F0 and SPL. We can combine this information with that information and build little maps of what the EGG looked like in various parts of the voice range. But we weren't really interested in that. What we were interested in was the lung volume effect on the EGG, which presumably is much more subtle than these effects. So what we can do then is to make a correlation between something that changes with shape. And let me go back. There we are. So what's this? Well, this is actually H2, H1 of the EGG waveform, that first one. That's H3, H1. Those are the relative phases, and we've got lots of others. But the idea here is if there is any shape change in the EGG with lung volume, we could correlate that. And we have data points for every single cycle in the phonation of these tasks. And so we can paint that with -1 for a negative correlation and +1 for a positive. And lo and behold, we have a negative correlation between this H2, H1 and lung volume. And I'll remind you then that in every cell here, there are hundreds of cycles to build those statistics on, okay? However, it would have been much nicer, wouldn't it, if it all had been red? Because then the thing would have been sort of easy to deal with. Now, the effect is the opposite in soft voice and in loud voice. All right? Do you understand what's going on there? All right. And so, all right, well, let's look at another subject, and maybe that will help us. We will see how EGG shape does co-vary with lung volume somehow. Here's another subject. Oh. Well, so this is, again, there is clearly some sort of something going on here, but it doesn't seem to be at all the same as in the first subject. Okay? And here, we have a third subject, and again we see that yes, there is something going on with lung volume and EGG shape, but it's not the same as for the other two. So, all humans are different. And now we get into another issue, of course. Here's another quote. An art is a science with more than 7 variables. Right. I think we're there, aren't we? Okay. So, we have diversity all over the place. That's the fourth challenge. Whatever we do with voice, things are going to be different with the person, with the day of the week, well, you name it. And we have to somehow manage this. In fact, we love diversity. If the audience is bored, it leaves, right? And so here's the tough message. Any hypothesis that is easy to test is probably uninteresting. And this is a real challenge in the communication between practitioners and scientists, I feel. It's really difficult to formulate a testable hypothesis that actually is very meaningful. If we go back to those things here, I can say with statistical confidence that the red cell here is because that there is a negative correlation between the lung volume and that shape parameter. But of course, that's not terribly interesting if it turns out that it kind of varies all over the place like this. And how are we going to deal with that? How are we going to interpret that? Okay. So we need to find a clever way of asking the right questions again. If future voice science is to be more relevant to the craft of performance, we must learn better to cope with this diversity. So what can we do? Well, we can look at how the voice varies over its operating range. We can choose questions for which you can easily make many observations. That's not so easy, but we'll try to make factorial experiments with lots of things being watched at the same time, perhaps. I think this is interesting. Learn about big data. This is a buzzword, and I'm sometimes very annoyed with big data as a buzzword because it's being used for all sorts of weird things. But I think perhaps we should take a leaf out of the book of the people who do this, because we can actually, there are clever people who know how to massage huge bodies of data and find out what's going on in them. In fact, we might even try some pattern recognition or machine learning. The master program at my school at KTH of Computer Science and Communication, the largest master program at the moment is that in machine learning. They have 300 students all taking things like machine learning and pattern recognition and stuff. And that's a big new trend in society. We could probably learn something from that. However, here be dragons. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, if we're starting to learn machine learning, what we're actually doing, in my opinion, is we're starting to bring in subjectivity into our computers. Because the machine will learn in some way and it will choose a certain classification or categorization. And it means that we won't really know how it arrived at that decision, because there is so much data. People are doing fantastic things with neural networks now that that field has matured. What's spooky is that big mega corporations are using it to fathom us. And I don't want to get into that discussion now. Okay, let's take another example of diversity. Fundamental strength. That's a nice phrase, isn't it? We're fundamentally strong. Here's the fundamental, and it has a certain strength in relation to the rest of the spectrum. Why is that interesting? Well, it kind of reflects on how pressed the voice is, or if you have a very flowy mode of phonation. Okay, but this, of course, is a spectrum at a pitch and a loudness, and that's not telling us the whole story. So we might want to actually map this over the whole voice range. So you recognize these pictures. Here we have the color-coded strength of the fundamental. So down here at low effort level and low frequency, the fundamental dominates a lot because it's green, and up here it's the harmonics, the upper harmonics that dominate. So in fact, if you go to Peter's summer house down here, you will appreciate the fundamental, and if you go to Groningen up here, it's more the overtones. We need I submit, the voice is too variable for just numbers, right? We need, for a larger view, we need maps, and we need to come up with useful maps. We have the audiogramming audiology, the voice range profile is kind of that, but we can apply that in so many interesting ways. Life is short, art is long, opportunity fleeting, experimentation is perilous, and judgment is difficult. It's an old Greek philosopher, Hippocrates, and I can only agree. But that mustn't stop us from doing it. Okay, fifth challenge and the last one. Culture shock. So we're often approached as scientists by voice teachers saying, "Dear scientists, let us do some experiments so that I can prove to the world that my teaching method works." That's wonderful. I mean, we want this curiosity, we want this striving for objective assurance, don't we? I love this quote. "Science is a method to keep yourself from kidding yourself." So the scientist's response, regrettably, will be, "I'd be glad to do that, of course. But if it's your hypothesis, then my job would be to disprove it." So the null hypothesis that we're supposed to use is such a turn-off, isn't it? And I think this is a problem, because it's sort of stifling. And also the research paradigm, I think, is very, very cumbersome when we start to deal with behavior and with what people do, and the voice that is so incredibly multidimensional. And I really, I want to do ecologically valid experiments, but then everything changes and you have to narrow it down somehow. And I guess we just have to plod the path, but I think we can learn something from using our computers to greater advantage. But we'll need the help of others to do that. Of course, many of you are probably doing it already, and I just don't know about it. Okay. So, minding the gap, it's about, I think, minding the relationship between ourselves, in a way. Let's summarize a little bit what we've been saying here. I think we should focus on the craft. There's no point in trying to unite the pure art with the pure science. One is subjective, one is objective, and they have completely different roles to play. But they both depend on the craft, and there's a lot of cross-fertilization going on, and that's where we can be creative, that's where we can make money, if you like, and that's what drives the whole thing. I think we should really be careful about trying to understand each other and talk about the same thing, that we're trying to look at the same level of representation. In the well-meaning stream of research that is going on, you sometimes come across questions like, does a sorrowful performance correlate with a lower second formant frequency, for example? To me, that is a severe mixing of representational levels. I mean, F2 is an acoustic parameter, something to do with the sorrowfulness of a certain performance. That is on a much higher representational level, and there might, of course, be a link, but it's not the first thing I would look for. You see what I mean? Find the right questions. That's really hard. I mean, that's basically 80% of science. If you can figure out what exactly is the hypothesis that I should formulate. And you need to do that together with the people who are interested in the answers. Maybe this, develop the research paradigm. Because if we're going to look for significance all the time in the way we are doing, we will have to narrow the question to something completely uninteresting in most cases, unless you're very clever, and of course we are. We need to learn to cope with diversity in as many interesting ways as we can. This is it. I haven't talked about that so much, but show mutual respect. At engineering universities, there is a kind of, I regret to say, a sort of a sneering disregard of things artistic as being subjective, unprovable, unaccessible, and all of this. And the artistic academies are a bit miffed at that, rightly so, I think. It's really difficult because when you're doing something subjective, you have the prerogative of being right, in some sense. You can't say that a work of art is wrong or right. But still we have some notion that some art is good and other art is not good. And there are many people trying to think about that and to understand what it is that makes a good painting as distinct from a poor painting. The point I want to make is that if we want to talk to each other and if we do want to bridge between art and science, we really have to understand that we're doing different things, but that we can help each other to do it. And be creative, because that's what makes it fun, surely. So what is this image? Is it an outpouring of chemicals from some gas chromatograph, or is it sunrise on the rings of Saturn, or something? Actually, a painting that hangs in my living room, and it's by my mum. She's 84 and she does digital painting. So, I think the gap lies inside us. It's a matter of what attitude. I can go to an opera and listen for hertz or decibels, or I can go to an opera and listen for the passionate message. And if opera isn't good enough, I will drift to the hertz and the decibels. Right? And if it's good enough, I will completely forget about the hertz and the decibels. So we're looking at, it's the same, we're just looking at the world from different angles. So I think the gap lies inside us, not between us. And that's pretty much what I had to say. So, thank you.